Welcome and thank you for joining us on this Earth Day for a deep dive into the work of Susan Goethel Campbell, whose multimedia practice explores humankind's complex relationship with the natural environment. I'm Sarah Kirk-Hanley, the Executive Director of Manhattan Graphic Center. Our events are made possible in part by grants from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the Sherman Foundation, the Pierre and Tana Matisse Foundation, and our supporters. Thank you. This evening, we are delighted to welcome Susan Goethel Campbell, a multidisciplinary artist based in metropolitan Detroit. Her work considers the engineered environment as a natural process. The integration and erasure of human agency over broader global systems is a concept central to Campbell's practice. Her work is realized in several formats, including prints, drawings, photographs, video, and installation. Campbell's work has been exhibited internationally in Belgium, Germany, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, Slovenia, and throughout the United States. Museums that include Campbell's work in their collection are the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the New York Public Library, Yale University Art Gallery, Minneapolis Institute of Arts, Detroit Institute of Arts, the Grand Rapids Art Museum, the Toledo Museum of Art, and the University of Michigan Special Collections Library. She has taught studio art at both the graduate and undergraduate levels, including on the faculty of both the Cranbrook Academy of Art and the College for Creative Studies. She has been a visiting artist in numerous institutions of higher education throughout the country. Before we begin, I would like to point out the Q&A function, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. Please type any questions in there and we will be sure to get to them. If you have a technical question about what you're seeing at the time on the screen, I will go ahead and introduce that question at the time. But if you have a broader question about Campbell's practice or something more philosophical, we will save that for the end for a discussion period. The chat is disabled to allow full enjoyment of the images and Ms. Campbell's talk. And with that, I will please welcome, with my great delight, Susan Goethel Campbell.
Hi, everyone. It's really exciting to be here, however distant, and it's great to welcome you to spend this time with me and allow me to talk about my work with you. I'm going to open up my presentation here. Hold on one second. And there we go. And I want to thank Sarah and also the Manhattan Graphic Center for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. I think maybe, do you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, so something's wrong because that's how it is. 1 second.
Look down at the bottom.
There. Yep, I can see it, but let's try this.
That's better.
All right, we're getting there. Okay, there we go. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about my past and how I became a printmaker. My father actually was a paper salesman, and ever since I was very, very young, I was sensitized to paper and ink on paper without even knowing that I was going to be a printmaker. He would sell paper to printers, and he would bring home these magnificent samples, including little swatch books of Japanese paper that I loved because it had such a different feel from any paper that I was familiar with. He also brought home sheets of labels, and one label sheet that I loved was Morton Salt. It wasn't placed like this, it was flat, And I actually wallpapered my room with some of these labels. One was Morton Salt and the other was Copenhagen Snuff, chewing tobacco. I just thought it was the coolest thing. And I, at that time, would have had no idea about Andy Warhol and some of his projects, but it would have been at the same time. So printmaking and multiples was in my life very, very early on. Okay, told you I was having mouse problems earlier. Let's see if we can. He also talked a lot about printing problems and problems that printers would have during the printing process. This is my own studio, and I sometimes have printing problems as well. When I am printing with the windows open, I get insects flying into my ink slab, and this poor little fly didn't quite make it, but I let him try to get there off the slab. But it's fascinating because as a kid, you just take in things in your daily life, not even giving them any thought. And so my father would talk about how ink sits on paper and how some papers that were coated didn't receive the ink very well. It sat on the surface. And all of this stuff must have registered with me because I'm totally sensitive to that. And I think about that constantly in my studio when I'm working with prints. I was fortunate, I've been fortunate a couple of times to work with Tom Bless in Bern, Switzerland. This is Tom. And I wanted to show you this because he has this very large offset press. And I had never done offset printing. And 2 years ago, I wound up working with him and we did a project together. So you can see that there's a plate right on the press bed right here. And that's an aluminum plate. And for this printing process, for those of you that don't know offset, it's an indirect process. So the inking is done on this plate as it's kept wet, and it is transferred to a blanket, and then it is printed on the paper. So the paper doesn't lay on top of the plate like it does in other processes. It's indirect. And offset printing is really what revolutionized lithography, and it's used to this day. That sheet of labels that I had as a young kid, that was all offset. I also just want to point out the complexity of this press and the rollers. So when you want to change colors, it's not just clicking your trackpad somewhere. You have to clean all the ink off of those rollers. So hand printing is labor intensive. And then if something goes wrong with the printing process, which it did while I was there, the press itself, I think it was a trip button, then you find the oldest and most knowledgeable person in Bern, Switzerland to come and fix this very special press. So Tom got it working and we continued on with our project. So today what I want to do is talk about print in my practice. And I have a very expanded concept of print. Use it as documentation. I have used it for public projects. I make traditional prints, and then I also make multiples that I consider to be prints, almost three-dimensional objects, but I still consider them to be prints. Print has informed everything that I do, conceptually, physically, and I want to just talk a little bit about ideas behind my work. So I think of myself as somebody that's very curious about the world, and I have all of these inquiries that I'm constantly working on. And they're fueled, my inquiries are fueled by questions. And I want to mention Happy Earth Day. It's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Every day is Earth Day for me. I try to stay engaged with my local environment as much as possible, as well as the global environment. So the questions that drive my work are, how do we understand change in the physical environment? Are there ways to cultivate curiosity within the local landscape? What role does science play in our daily lives? Is there another way to think about the built environment, and who defines what progress is? So those questions circle back into my work at different points in my life. And I don't necessarily address the answer. I make the work to pose the question. So the first piece that was a seminal work for me that really still informs my work to this day is a piece called Detroit Weather 365 Days. And I started this piece in 2009 when I received a very generous fellowship along with 18 other artists from Detroit from the Kresge Foundation. It was a $25,000 fellowship, was a substantial amount of money, and it allowed me to open up my practice in ways that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So what I did, I'm always have been interested in atmosphere and weather and air pollution. I have a good friend that had a office right up here on the 22nd floor of an Albert Kahn building in Detroit. It's called the Fisher Building. And they have a little parapet here, and I could crawl out the window and hang out on this parapet and see the Detroit skyline. It was magnificent. I also decided I wanted to start recording the weather. So I purchased a webcam, set it up inside the building in my friend Jack's office, and the camera took still images of the Detroit skyline. And at the time I was making a lot of drawings of clouds and landscape, very traditional. And I wanted a resource to work from. I became so mesmerized by every still image that I started to record, take the images, compress them into videos. And then the project became this massive project where I recorded a year's worth of weather over the city of Detroit. And it became a 3-hour video if viewed singularly. But when I showed this, I split it in two. So the year was cut in two between the two solstices. This work, and if you see these clouds right here, that's Southwest Detroit where there's a lot of industry. The footage in that last segment was spurred many projects that I'm going to talk about. Because what I was seeing were these cumulus clouds coming out of the industrial stacks. They produce a lot of heat, and they actually hold clouds overhead. So you have this situation where, because of emissions, the heat and torque from emissions, it's affecting weather patterns. And that's fascinating, it's horrifying, but it's real science that I became deeply immersed in. And then this last image here is a still that fueled another body of work called Aerials that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So that video and that project, which lasted a year, launched a couple of public projects for me. And before I get into them, I want to talk about just briefly a few artists that are very inspirational to me, especially because it is Earth Day. A pioneer with land art is Agnes Dennis. She has done remarkable projects, the wheat field in Lower Manhattan in the 80s or 90s, I can't remember. One of her very early projects, she planted rice in the spillover of Love Canal. Mel Chin has worked quite a bit with remediating soil at the Pigs Island landfill. Ellie Irons makes pigments from invasive weeds. Mary Mattingly has done this great project on a barge where she grows food and it floats in New York. And so those people, there's so many great artists out there doing interesting work. I wanted to just let you know, my work doesn't come out of a vacuum. There's many people that are inspiring to me. But back to the public art project that I did. This is an offset piece, publication that I did called Cloud Spotting Detroit. And if you think of those questions that I posed earlier, a big one is how do I get people to stay engaged with their local environment? And I thought, instead of pointing the finger at people that are polluters, just how can I engage someone to look around and understand what's going on? So I did a cloud spotting guide for the city. I have scientific keys in there for different types of clouds. And then I also included man-made clouds. So the front has a map. It's a bike route that I actually have led bike tours to all these great man-made cloud spots in the city. And the back has a key to some of the photos. So again, I'm blurring the distinction between clouds, and I want the human clouds to be right in there with meteorological clouds. A few categories that I have are historic clouds of dust. In the mid-90s, there were lots of building implosions in the city of Detroit, and it kind of became a hobby to go to these things because it was so astounding to see a building come down. So you can also learn about the history of clouds based on historic clouds of dust. One of my favorite categories that I put in this guide was street spas. And there are many, many leaky steam tunnels, as New York has, other cities have, but it's clean steam. And so I thought, wow, these could just be great places for people to hang out. Usually they're in the middle of the street, but this, I got a couple of friends of mine to pose as if it was a spa in the middle of downtown Detroit. Another category of clouds that I have are savory clouds. Those are barbecue. They're great barbecue places in Detroit. And then instead of negatively judging things, I just call the industrial clouds pungent clouds. So there's this is a steel smelter on Zug Island. So this brochure I then placed in places where you'd find tourist brochures. And I don't know how many people pick these things up, but I had a lot of fun with it. I put it in hotels, and it was a great project, my first, where I really started thinking about engaging the public. A second project that I did because of that weather video, I became so enamored with air pollutants and particulate matter. I contacted the state of Michigan to see if I could shadow one of their air monitoring technicians. It took me a while to find someone to work with, but I did. And I learned a lot about how particulate matter is measured. So this little place that looks like a city of birdhouses, those are all compressors, and they've got filters in there, and they're pulling particulates out of the air. So just to give you a sense, this sheet of white paper, which is a filter, that was in one of these compressors in Southwest Detroit for 24 hours. And the gray is what was pulled out of the atmosphere in that area. So I learned a lot about this, and I thought, what can I do with this? This is like, how can I engage the public? So I actually secured a box of 100 of these filters. They're actually made from spun glass. And I put them in packets, and I asked people I knew at the beginning in different parts of the world, if I had framed them, if they would put the filter in a place where they thought the air was dirty. And then after some amount of time, they could send them back to me, which they did. This is not scientific. I love science, but it's not scientific. And the places that they put the filters were fantastic. So some of them I had magnets on the back, so you could attach them to a surface. This woman put hers on the hood of her car and followed a bus. This person just put it in their house near this sort of nativity set. This is near a meat smoker. This is in New York on the side of a dumpster, an overpass. And I found that the places that they put the filters were so inventive that became the documentation of the project for this series called Dirty Pictures, Portraits of Air. So I was invited to the Three Rivers Art Festival, I think it's Three Rivers, in Pittsburgh to do a project. They asked if I would maybe project a video or something. And I said, you know, you have a really strong organization there called the Breathe Project. I'd love to partner with them and do a Dirty Pictures project if you would help fund that. So it became a year-long project there. They set me up at the festival and I passed out 100 packets with these framed filters in there. And it was a great project. The only problem is they put me next to a radio station and it was constantly blaring music, which was great, but like a lot of what I do is talk. So for a whole weekend, I was competing with this radio station. Anyways, so I had that project underway, and then I went back a year later and exhibited the air filters in a gallery. Here's a little recording of someone that read where all those filters were placed. Let me see if I can play just a snippet of this. Oh, maybe it doesn't, maybe it won't go.
Susan, how did you choose who to send these to? Well,
in Pittsburgh, that was based on people coming up to the booth. So I asked if they would like to engage in the project, and people loved it. I ran out of filters. I mean, I was really heartbroken when this little kid said, I know where I'm going to put it. And I didn't have any more to send to give them. Anyways, I can't play that, but this piece was documented in another offset package called Dirty Pictures, Portraits of Air. So I have done 2 of those, one in Pittsburgh and then another one that is, I did a small one in New York. Okay, so I want to get on to traditional prints. And I, for the past 10 years, have been working almost exclusively just with woodblock prints. This is a small village that I worked in Germany. And I was planning to make some black and white prints there. This is in the summer. It was, maybe 2012. And they had a giant French tool press. I was really excited about it. But I have to, the studio is up here and I'd take these boards down and sand them and then have to carry them up. But it was still beautiful. There was a garden and it was a really hot summer. And I had to change my whole project because my black ink never arrived, but they had all these colorful offset prints. And they also had these nasturtiums growing in their garden. So that fueled this whole series called Heatscapes, where I had been wanting to work with this concept of urban heat islands where the center of a city is more, it has a different weather pattern because it's hotter and it produces different weather where the outlying areas are cooler and greener. And so I think that's, it's curious, it's fascinating. It's also, again, problematic. These prints are woodblock prints mounted on panels, and they have hand stenciling on them. So that red is a hand stenciling. That series of prints has evolved to more reductive woodblock panels. And this is another Heatscape. I like to work with architecture. This is based a lot on data and information about weather maps that show hot areas, and red, of course, always means, the ozone is higher or whatever. And I'm working with these currently. I've also started to work with pairs and colors, and I really like the nuance of the wood grain within the panel. So I'm working with different configurations. I'm now also including large-scale digital prints, and I think of these as vertical landscapes. So the photo here, I like the fact that that's something there's a stone, you see it through the water, and I think, okay, if you go up, there's cement, there's blue sky. The red is maybe a more chemical color, stoplights. So it's like a vertical inventory of landscape. This is one I just finished. And again, water. I had the good fortune to spend a week on Lake Huron. My friends let me use their house last summer. I was there by myself and just had a blast watching the water for a week. Now I want to go back to prints that aren't mounted on panels, and my process where I print backgrounds and then I punch holes in the paper. These prints are based on wind patterns and wind direction. As I mentioned, I'm really enamored with graphics and data and information, and we're so bombarded with it in our daily lives that I feel sometimes it's like a force. It's like a big wind out there. It's coming at you, and it just can bowl you over sometimes. There's so much information to consume. So I started to work with these wind maps as gestures, whether they're water or wind, I don't know, but those little L shapes, they do mean something with wind speed. So here's some of the, you can see, what I'll do is I'll extract a gesture from information and then incorporate it into my prints. So those were quite a while ago, and they were quite technical. And so I wanted to go back to landscape, and I started this series. This led to the aerial series, but it's that concept of data and information is almost like a natural phenomena in our daily life, where it's overpowering, and it's like a thunderstorm or something, or a firefly going berserko. This is a really large series. I would put 2 pieces of paper together. Just a little notation about my wood blocks. I don't carve the wood at all. I think wood is too beautiful. And I instead coax the grain pattern out by either sandblasting or sanding. And I work with the same blocks for years. So you can see here, this is sandblasted a little bit, but I know them so well and I reuse them. And I actually make little notations on the side of the wood so that I know what the personality is like a little bit. And like this, I say like the green flash, that when the sun goes down, I've never seen it, but there's on some instances, there's this flash of green that you can see right after the sun goes down. And the orbs in that wood remind me of the green flash. My favorite little note is hard to hold. And that is because I don't carve the wood, the relief is very low. So when I roll ink, which I'll show you a video in a minute, over the surface, it's very shallow. And I edition my prints, I only do about 5 because they're hard to hold. It's hard to hold an edition. Plus, I don't really feel a need to make so many prints of one image. But anyway, so they're like old friends. And I know all of their strengths and their quirkiness, the boards, and choose them for those qualities. For example, this is an aerial piece based more on the geometry of cities. But this area right in here, even though I use a gradation, there's a dip in the board. And that dip, because the ink doesn't pick up evenly, I use that. To create some sort of atmosphere. So I like the wood I try to find what it has to offer and go from there. This probably was opened up a little bit. So again, these are all holes in the paper. They allow the light to come through. And what I do when I print is I print a whole series of backgrounds, and then I perforate the paper with a Japanese little tool that's used in bookbinding, which you'll see in just a sec. a few years ago, I was invited to create an edition of prints at the Print Research Institute of North Texas. And they wanted me to do an edition of 25 or 30 of these prints, which I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do that. But they said, we would like you to work with graduate students. So it was pretty interesting because I usually print all my work myself. That's the biggest edition of these I've ever done. So here you can see, and I think we just had like a week and a half. I usually layer several layers of black and white or a gradation to build up the richness. I think with this print, we only did 2 or 3 layers. Then I thought, well, how am I going to get them to punch? Because when I do it, I stack the prints on top of each other, 5 at a time. I take this little tool and I put a template on top, but I make the decisions as I go along, like it's a drawing. Like I think, where am I going to remove? Where do I want the line? Like say this line here, I would go, I think I want to have that a little wider, a little whiter. So I had to really work with the students, and I gave them these templates, and here's the tool that I use. So it has these little bits that you can replace, and there's like 5 different sizes. So that is how I make the marks in these prints. And it turned out great. It was a learning experience for me to have somebody else print the work. So these prints evolved to very minimal landscapes of coastlines. And I used to travel a lot, not anymore. But I just love when you take off and you're crossing the ocean, or you see a shoreline and just this sinuous line. This board I just love. This is almost like a cirrus cloud. So that would be an old friend. That would be a board I would say is an old friend. And then here's another really minimal piece. And I haven't made aerials, these black and white prints, in a long time because I am just in love with color. And you can see behind me a series of prints these are very new. They were just shown at Planthouse Gallery. A collaboration with Katie Michael and Aspinwall Editions invited me to have a show there, and I was thrilled. I didn't even get to see it, but I was happy to have these prints out. They've all been produced since COVID. And these are prints that are double layered, meaning there's 2 prints that are on top of one another. So this is the top layer, and then there would be another sheet of paper underneath to provide the color. And here you can see this is my print studio. So like this might be the top layer. I'd punch the holes in that and then maybe put this underneath. Sometimes I would punch through both layers to get white. Here I'm fortunate I have 2 spaces. This is a studio I use for collating my prints and working with installation pieces. Right now it's really clean because I've just been printing. The inspiration for these prints came from flying over the Caribbean. The watercolor was just phenomenal. And that was, this is sandblasting. This is how I open up the grain of the wood. That's the roller that I use. And it would have been rolled on that wood. So here's the 2 layers of the prints that you can see. And this series, Lost Cities, is, there's actually 11. So this is the print that I just showed you. I just lifted up the 2nd layer. And I don't have a photo of how I work with this, but I print out on a piece of Mylar the template that I'm thinking of punching out, so I can see how it would interact with the grain of the wood. I make a lot of changes as I go along. I really like to work in a series, and when I exhibit them, I like to build these relationships between lines in one print and in lines in another. It's another one. This was the last one I did. and it's a larger size, and they're becoming less specific and definitely more organic.
Okay,
So
Susan, we have a question from the
sure,
audience, if I can interrupt.
sure, absolutely.
Ann Gilman.
Oh, yes.
Hi, Susan. In some of the prints, it almost looks like you're wiping some ink away. I'm thinking of one of the last coastline prints you showed. Are you hand wiping in some cases after rolling the ink on the block?
Great question. Hi, Anne. I miss you. And Anne has a great printmaker and artist. She teaches at Pratt. So actually, Anne, no, I don't. That's all in the wood. I don't wipe any ink away. So the wood is opened up either by sandblasting or there's a dip there. It would be just too hard for me to hold that, and so all of the prints where it looks like it's lighter, it's not wiped, if that answers. Okay, so I make traditional prints, but I also do a lot of experimentation. And going back to that series of questions, how do I stay engaged with my local environment? I look at debris. I look at what natural debris, things that fall from trees or litter. I look and I want to always know what's going on. So one Christmas, I just decided to collect discarded Christmas trees and print them. And this is the parking lot of my studio. I inked it up in house paint and made these really large scale prints. I had a lot of fun with this. I first tried it in my studio and it was so messy. I waited until it got warm. Okay, so these are really large falling tree prints. But I started this series called Seasonal Prints Winter. And when I'm kind of in a lull, I go, okay, oh my gosh, it's like now it's spring. What am I going to do right now for spring? Sometimes if I don't have, a lot of deadlines, I just start to play. This one, I don't have walnuts in my yard, but my one of my studio mates does, and I love to work with stains. So he brought in all these walnuts for me. Whoops. I just want to show you how these were created. And I wanted to work with a dye. But so instead of just leaving it under there, we started to make marks with these really ripe walnuts. And then I left the paper outside, and it just got this beautiful, rich brown from those walnuts. So these were seasonal prints fall. One summer, there was a mulberry tree, it's now gone, that overhung on our parking lot. And you couldn't park a car there for a couple months because it would stain and ruin the finish. But I certainly got some nice recordings of the mulberries. So those were seasonal prints summer. Okay, the last
one more question from the audience. Yeah. Actually, going back to your prior works with the templates, the stencils that you use.
Yep.
This is from Dorothy Cochran, who's one of our members at MGC, and she is also an instructor with us. Are you creating your templates with a laser cutter to do your hand punching later? The prints are wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Dorothy. No, I don't use any laser cutter whatsoever. I have in the past for another series of prints, but the template, I punch right through the template while I'm punching the paper. So when I say I punch maybe 5 or 6 at a time, I not only have to go through 5 sheets of paper, I also have to go through the template, which is made of Mylar. So no, I don't pre-punch it, and it's largely, it would be tough for me because my decision making is in the moment. It is, I look at a line and I think about how to translate that into a mark. And it's all, I feel my way through those holes. I might lift it up and I go, oh, I need to make this more open, whatever. Okay, so again, staying with that idea of the seasons, we're in dandelion season right now, which is one of my favorite seasons. I've collected a lot of dandelion in the past, and I'm interested in this idea of impermanence and building, and going back to like how, the built environment. How is there another way to look at the built environment? So here's how I made that little dandelion brick. And here is a piece that I did. I made a lot of little videos this past year. This is just an excerpt from one, but again, I like this idea of decline, where things are not permanent. And Detroit certainly has a lot of derelict buildings, and they've always been very inspirational to me, especially bricks. I've done a series of brick books that I'm not going to talk about here, but they, the brick is a single unit for a much larger structure, and I like to work with that shape. It's a building block. I had a great residency at the Banff Center for the Arts a while back, and I played around with ephemeral materials on the floor and installation. I did these very large digital prints that I embedded in the wall and then painted over, so it looks like these people are floating in the wall. And that past block, that was a big block of dandelion. So I started to bring in grass and other natural materials, and this was a great residency for me. I absolutely loved it there and broke through into some new territory with my work. Now, to talk about print as multiple, I've done lots of experimenting with growing things, and I have this distaste for consumer containers that are those vacuum form containers. Everything is prepackaged, and that plastic is so hard. It's just everywhere. Everything is in these plastic containers. So one year, this was quite a while back, I noticed I had the little thing of wheatgrass in my house, and when it died, and I put it out on my wood pile, and it was out there all winter, but I looked at the shape of it and I thought, you know, wow, that's just really an imprint. That's a print. So I started to grow grass in vacuum form plastics, and it's a way to record. I used the roots were actually recording the contour of the container. So to me, these are prints. I experimented with a lot of different types of grass, and here are some of the individual units. You can probably recognize some of these light bulbs. I really love the pairing of the organic material with technology. This was an iPad case. I mean, you can go through the seasons, Easter, everything's in plastic. I then started to, once I got my growing down, I started to work with these very large installations that I call grounds. These units here were grown in those plastic containers that you get lettuce, earthbound farm lettuce. This was a show I had at the Grand Rapids Art Museum called Resisting Certainty. These were grown in the containers for Girl Scout cookies, those tag-alongs. So the patterns of the containers, I think, were wonderful. And then the most ubiquitous plastic out there has to be a water bottle. Everywhere you go in the world, there's plastic water bottles. In fact, Roland Barthes, if you ever want to look at an interesting essay, in 1957, wrote a really stunning essay on plastic. And he even referred to it as it's become like a natural material. So for me, I started to think, what is the most ubiquitous piece of plastic out there? And I did a lot of installation with water bottles. This was a show I had at the David Klein Gallery, and I wanted to imitate this column. So I made a column out of bottles and earth, and then I made a base that had nothing on it. So it's this, this support system, like there's so much that supports architecture and money and things that are, it's hard to be really critical here, but I kind of have a love-hate relationship with certain systems of power and materials. And so there was a lot into this show. It was called Faulty Vision. So I had to stop growing the grass myself. I'm not a great farmer. And at the time I had these projects, I was teaching full time. And I think actually Anne Gilman took this picture. She was a visiting artist. I was teaching at Cranbrook. And so I started to outsource the growing of the grass. And so I would pick up these trays, and at the bottom are the water bottles. And so I would I'd pick up my crop and flip them over in my studio and dry them. So all of those pieces that you've seen with earth, though, that's all dried. It's all dried grass, especially if I'm going to take it into a museum. I can't have any insects or any little critters, so no water. So it's dried. Another question I always have is how do we understand time and change? And one way that I can understand time and years is through packaging and the progression of technology, which is changing so rapidly. I started collecting the boxes. I put out a call for people to send me their old phone boxes. And if you, like within a, 10-year period, how many iterations of iPhones have there been? So this little one, that's an iPhone 3. And these only go up to 3, 4, 5. But I started to think this is an interesting way to look at time. This is a wall that I produced with growing grass in all the different sizes of iPhone. I think it just went up to an 8 maybe. This was at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit. So it's a sod wall, and I embedded those units into the wall. It's called Refurbished Wall.
Can you talk about the red part?
Yes.
Is that up there on the?
Yes. There's another piece. I'm not. That piece actually is a real piece, but I wanted to put something that related to the language of building, and there's a lot of just boarded up areas when I go and I see grass coming out of buildings. Sometimes there's like just a piece of wood laying, or it's just it's there to just reference a material. But it is a part of a piece that later became always red, and the grass turns brown, which I really like, but the piece always stays red. So again, it's trying to think about time and impermanence and how we understand change. So it's like a marker for that. Most recently, I've been working with stacks, creating these totems with the grass, and this would be a stack made from sushi trays. I grew the grass in sushi trays. And here is, if we were live, I would say, anybody guess what what's grown in? Anyways, those are rotisserie chicken trays. And I've started to paint on these. So I've left them for a little while I work on these Lost City prints, but who knows when I'll go back to them. And right before COVID, ArtX Chicago, David Klein featured some of my work in their booth, and they wanted me to do an installation of the sod, so I wrapped a corner. This is the only shot I have, and I have some of these panels here, but there were totems all the way around this. This is one of my favorite molds that I use. It's actually from a plastic tray that you put plants in, and I'm coming close to the end here. So I want to end with a piece that really is a piece that I feel very good about. And I was invited back to Texas. I was in a show there at this university, and they sent a truck. I shipped all these rounds. I had my weather video there. And then she said, how should I pack them back up and ship them? And I said, this piece is really about impermanence. I would love to install it outside or something and let it break down. And they invited me back. So I worked for 2 weeks with fiber students, and we made this natural dye. We added to a garden that was already there for plants for natural dyes. There was indigo, and you can see this is how I package these things when I ship them. They're like these window mats, so the fringe of the grass doesn't get all wonky. But I loved it because the soil here was really pretty crappy, and the soil that I use for the grass is very loamy, and it's great for remediating soil. I do that around my studio in the back. There's some really great soil back there now. So here are some install shots of the students helping me. We're making new garden beds, and they were intended to erode and refurbish the soil. So here you see them decomposing, and that's it.
Great. Thank you. That was fascinating. I love the way you think about print in such an expansive way. And of course, you have given such a considered view of our relationship that is very nuanced to the natural environment. We do have some more audience questions. Elizabeth Youngblood has asked a question in the chat, in the Q&A, and also raised her hand. So I'm going to put out the typed out question, and then I'll allow her to speak with as well. Do you ever reuse the templates similar to the way you reuse the boards?
I'm sorry, reuse the templates of the print for the print?
Yeah, I think it came in a while ago, but I wanted to let you finish talking about your grounds pieces. Pieces
all right, so Elizabeth, hi. I do reuse those sometimes, but you know how I use them? I use them as stencils. So the way back, those early heatscapes that I showed, that I did in Germany, where there's this red line, those lines were created by doing pochoir through a used template. So that's a great question. I have, and I haven't for a while. I haven't, I found when I would use a template as paper, it would work better. But when I use Mylar, it gets this little hook on it, and it doesn't, I can't brush ink through as nicely. I should probably use a thinner plastic. But yeah.
Okay, Elizabeth, if you have anything further, please feel free to type it in the chat. And we have another question from Richard Turnbull, who is an MGC member, former board member, and former president of the board. Yeah. And he's asking, given your relationship to and thinking about the environment in your work, do you think about or use any green printmaking techniques, e.g. solvent-free, soy-based inks, etc.?
Great question. I wish I could say yes, but I use oil-based ink. I do not use any mineral spirits whatsoever. I clean up all with soy. So I'm green in that department, but my ink is oil-based. And at some point I would like to try it. I just probably need to go off somewhere and play with it. And yeah.
We've been researching in that potential transition for our studio, or at least offering that as an option. And we interviewed a number of our studio users, and almost unanimously they hate the inks. They want to keep those oil-based inks. Yeah, but I think that it turns out there are some new ones I've heard that are oil-based, but they're miscible, you know.
Sort of like those, what are the oil paints that are water? You can use them with water.
Yeah, they're emulsified in some way so that you can wash them with, you know, soap and water or dish soap. So we're, you know, that it's interesting. I mean, I think the technology is coming along in terms of being able to, I haven't tried them either, but, you know, being closer to those traditional inks we all love. We also have a question now from Andrew Hodorowski, excuse me, that stumbled on the tongue there, who is a scholar, critic, and gallerist. Your works with photo and color panel sequences, sound, growth in soil, travel a path close to cinema. Do you have plans to take your work into that medium as presentation of environmental condition? There's a second part to the question, but maybe you'd like to.
I think I might need a little clarification.
I think maybe what he means is there's sort of a time-based quality. You talked about using time and combined with the visuals and, you know, the sequencing that we see in your series. Andrew, if that's not right, please feel free to comment further.
Yeah, I have thought about, there's always been a time-based element in my work, like in the format and also conceptually. And I have worked with video, but I do like the sequencing, and goes back way to the weather video, where I wound up loving all those still images, and then I wanted to see what they would look like compressed into a video. But that's a whole new place that I would love to explore. I have done projections on ephemeral materials. There was a piece I did, and it had not milkweed, no, it had milkweed in it. It was a box, and milkweed is kind of buoyant, right? It doesn't, like, whereas dandelion will hold together, but milkweed just wants to float. And I had this video that I had done of airplane headlights called Big Sky Theory. It was very minimal, just had these flashing lights. So I projected through that buoyant milkweed. So I don't think I'm answering your question, but so much to do.
Do you have any plans to make films? I mean, you did show us quite a number of videos today, I guess.
I did, and I do have more that are complete videos. I showed you some excerpts. So yes, I do plan to work with video. Uh-oh.
I'm sorry, I forgot I was muted. I
right,
have a very chatty bird in the background. I don't want anyone to be distracted.
So far, good, yeah.
So we've become used to these things, right?
Right.
In the COVID era.
Yeah.
Anyway, Andrew said that was correct interpretation of his question. I'm interested in knowing if conceptually film might be presented as a political and cultural critique of power and state of environmentalism. You had mentioned, you had insinuated that you, without going into too much detail, that you have some issues with structures of power. So
yes, absolutely, yes, and that's an area I would like to explore. I mean, I think back to the Dirty Pictures projects, and when I was shadowing that air monitoring technician, it was the place where there was a high level of particulate matter is right near an elementary school. In fact, one day when I went, I would meet up with him in different locations, and I really liked that one because it was the most polluted area. There was a van in the parking lot of the school, and I followed this guy in the summer, so the school was not in session, but the air monitoring tech said, he said, see that van over there? And the the hatch was open, and there were like 5 students just hanging out in the van. He said, they are part of a pulmonary study for the University of Michigan, and they are paid to go and sit in that van with the door open and breathe the air all day. And then they go back to the university and they measure their lungs, what they have taken in. So there's all sorts of, it's so much to be done.
Okay, great, thank you. The second part of Andrew's question is, when does a work of art become important in your opinion? Do you need external confirmation, or is it something explicitly personal?
That's a very good question. It's a very personal, it's very personal for me. There's a little piece I have in my studio, my other studio, and it's a black gessoed panel, and it has a bicycle inner tube wrapped around it. And I know, I think it was shown here at my gallery. I don't think it, they just put it in the back. It's really little. It's maybe not so characteristic of my work, but that is like a really important piece to me. I love that piece. And if nobody gets it, it's very personal. I like it. So yeah, I've been at this a long time, and I don't.
You do seem guided by, you have that self-assurance. You kind of, at this point, mature artist who, what you're, interested.
I don't know what I'm doing, but it just wells up in me, and I do it. And sometimes it's awful stuff, and I don't show it to anybody, but I just always am doing.
Yes, and your comments further, so long as you get it, and smiley face.
Yeah, and sometimes I don't even get it. I don't know. I don't sometimes question why so much. I just do.
That segues into one question I would like to ask as your host.
Okay.
I know we've gone a bit over 6 p.m. and thank you for those who are still with us. But you do percolate your ideas for a long time, and I know because of my interactions with you that you always have these kind of brewing concepts that haven't quite made their way into your work yet.
Right.
And could you speak about some things that are currently kind of fermenting in your mind?
Yeah, and I just to kind of address that for me, because I always have a couple of investigations going, and then I have ideas that sleep. They have to be dormant for a while, and I know something's ready when, like, I'm just going to say those prints I started in Germany. I'd been thinking about urban heat islands for a long time, and it became this situation of an internal readiness and an external circumstances. They came together. I didn't have the right ink. It was a hot summer, and it was just ready. I was ready to find a way to work that into my work. In terms of what I'm working on now, or things that are percolating, sometimes I just start with playing with the material. And all last summer, during COVID, I worked with the Lost Cities prints. I think I had 6 done, and then Katie talked to Anne and Aspinwall, and they offered me this exhibition, in which I was thrilled. So I kind of stopped what I was playing with, which was I was steam bending willow. I would go out and harvest early spring, because I was just going stir crazy being just in Michigan, and I would go out and drive until I got lost on dirt roads, and I would just look for watery trees like willow. And so I harvested a bunch of this willow, and I learned how to steam bend it. So I had a small steamer and a plastic bag, and I started to wrap the branches around the entire interior of my other studio. So it would record, again, it's that idea of recording using a natural branch to do something that's unnatural. There's something I really like about this pairing of getting this beautiful stick to go at a right angle. And I don't know where that's going, but it's gonna come back. Like everything was failed. I did that for months. And the other thing that hopefully I'll get to Germany and work with Anne Aspinwall and Knut Willow in the studio that they work out of. It looks like it will be next year. And they've invited me to do site-specific work on the grounds of this cultural center, where there's this great salt extraction facility. It's very old, and it intrigues me in a big way. So I've been incubating on that for quite a while, like what to do with the salty air that is because of salt. It's pulled out of the ground and it runs down these branches, and people sit there on benches and breathe in the salty air, which is kind of a poetic thing to think about. Yeah.
Sounds fascinating. I'm sure we all look forward to seeing what comes of it. So far, you've had a great collaboration with Aspinwall and Editions, and I think it's, we're all looking forward to seeing what you two all, or you three, do together. And with that, I guess that does answer my last question. If you have any exhibitions or things on the horizon for people to look out for, and if you have anything additional to add.
There will be a show with Tom Bless in Switzerland in 2022. Tom is the one that has the large offset press.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to that. So hopefully 2022 will be a lot of Europe. Yeah. So those are two big things. Yeah.
Yes, and I know you've had a very fruitful collaboration many years now with him as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
So with that, we'll thank you all for joining us this evening. If there are no more questions and from the audience, and we really want to thank you, Susan, for your generous time with us today, sharing your thoughts and your practice and the history of how your ideas come together. It's been fascinating and obviously very timely for today's holiday. And thank you. If you would like to learn more about Susan's work, you can visit her website, susangoethelcampbell.com, or follow her at Sue Goethel on Instagram. And to be informed about MGC's events, please join our mailing list, which you can find the form for on our website, or follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Manhattan Graphic Center. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining.